following the story, there is an ongoing baby formula shortage in the U.S. But with more empty shelves there, we are also seeing them on our side of the border now as well. There's growing concern that the shortage might get worse. And we want to talk more about this with someone who's in the know. And that is Michelle Pensa-Braco, the co-founder of SafelyFed Canada. Good morning, Michelle. Tell me, how do we get into this situation in the U.S.? Suddenly, baby formula not available.
Well, it's not so sudden. This has been an ongoing issue, certainly since the beginning of the pandemic. And it's something that Canada's been looking at and following all through the pandemic. But it's also something that happens pretty regularly in this part of the supply chain because there just aren't a lot of producers and it's a pretty small market. So when one of the producers has a production problem or there's an interruption of some of the inputs, some of the things that go into baby formula, which is one of the things we're seeing, it has a pretty big impact pretty quickly.
So a few things had to go wrong for this to happen in the U.S. There was a recall there. That's a big issue as well. There are big efforts going on in the U.S. right now to restock those shelves. And I'm wondering what your experience is right now, what you're seeing about parents looking to feed their babies. Are they still able to find what they need?
Yeah, I think most parents are still finding what they need, even in smaller communities or places where sometimes the availability isn't quite as broad. We're not really seeing widespread issues in terms of availability of standard infant formulas. The parents, I think, who are having a hard time are the parents whose babies need a medically indicated formula. So oftentimes things like dairy allergy. So because most infant formula is made from cow's milk, babies who are allergic to cow's milk protein, who are a small group, it's still an existing group, can't use those standard formulas. So for those parents, because there are really only two brands on the market and one of them isn't being produced, what we're seeing is that those parents are really having a hard time finding that particular product and associated ones.
This is an issue that hits so close to home for so many. And I'm wondering, some might be thinking of, well, can I come up with some sort of formula? Can I look online and come up with a recipe and make it with that, would that work? Would that keep my baby, fed and given its nutrition that it needs?
Yeah, one of the things I really want to reassure parents about is that babies really need infant formula for a pretty small period of time in their lives. So up to 6 months is really the period of time where we're most worried about making sure that they're either having human milk or they're having a cow's milk that's been modified into a baby formula. Once we're getting past the 6-month point, babies are eating solid foods. They have a lot more flexibility in terms of the foods that they can digest and what kind of nutrients they need. And once we're past a year, we really don't need formulas at all. So what I think we need to focus on is making sure that we're really getting help to the parents who are in a difficult situation in terms of not having the product available. But generally speaking, I'm not more worried about infant formula availability today than I was 6 months ago or 2 years ago.
Well, that's really reassuring then, because I know we're seeing a lot of these headlines out of the U.S. and I think people might be feeling a little bit nervous. They've got a little one that they need to feed. Are there any alternatives in case people are looking for something a little different or, just in case? You never know.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that a lot of babies who are using formula are also being partly breastfed. So really, if breastfeeding was not going great or could be improved, that's worth spending some time on anyway, and it happens to improve your food security overall. The other thing that parents can really think about is as they're getting towards that 6-month mark, thinking about what kinds of foods they can add to their baby's diet. If we're talking about making homemade formulas or adding solid foods to a baby's diet before 6 months, there are circumstances where that's necessary because we don't have an alternative that's safe. But those are really individual conversations, and we'd want to look at the baby's overall health and what's available and how long we're talking about. For a couple of days, there are lots of things that are totally acceptable. When we're talking about months and especially with a very young baby, then what's acceptable is a lot narrower.
So what do we do? Do we reach out to our doctor with questions?
You can reach out to your doctor. You can certainly reach out to your local public health unit. Many of them have helplines, and Telehealth Ontario also has infant feeding experts on the line. So you can call them, and sometimes they'll be available right away, or sometimes they'll give you a call back.
So an important message from you, I think, there is that you aren't seeing an emergency situation here. We could just kind of take a deep breath.
Yeah, I think we can take a deep breath for sure. One of the things I think that to keep in mind is I know that the overall supply chain is fine. I'm comfortable with it. But for a parent who shows up to their regular store and finds that the product that they're expecting to have there isn't there, that's a really stressful experience.
Sure.
So I think we really need to get that message out around the alternatives. For one thing, if the brand you usually use isn't there, it's very likely that any alternative brand that's on the shelf is fine.
Okay.
And that's certainly something I think that parents don't always get the message about, but that's something that that would be the first step, really, is to try a different brand, because we're not seeing broad shortages. And the second thing really is to keep in mind that the alternatives that are available to you are quite significant, with the exception of those parents who have these medical conditions. For those parents, really connecting with their baby's healthcare provider is the key thing.
Some very critical information there. Thanks so much for sharing with us this morning, Michelle.
My pleasure.
And I think a lot of parents are probably watching you feeding their babies, maybe giving them a little bit of a burp while they're listening to that information and feeling a little more reassured. Have a super day, Michelle. Lovely chatting with you.
Great. You too. Thank you.